welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on episode 8 of My Hero Academia. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So it seems like we're just taking a little bit to sort of recap everything so far. You know, it seems like Bakugo has sort of based his whole identity on essentially being better than Midoriya, and now that it's not... Well, I guess it's not that he's no longer better, it's that his, status is no longer above dispute, you know? Now that Midoriya has a power, there is the potential for him to be as good or better, and therefore, in Bakugo's eyes, it's unacceptable. And, you know, I think that's a rather unfortunate thing to base your personality on. You know, we're not really going into much detail here, but I think this was a rather brilliant strategy on Midoriya's part. I mean, I guess it did cost him both arms to pull off something like this, but when you sort of consider the other options he had, you know, the other big option staring him in the face was basically like, smash this guy to a pulp, which it seems to me is clearly not an option he could take. It's interesting that Bakugo is almost kind of horrified by this outcome in a weird sort of way. That Midoriya is saying, you know, this was the only way I had any chance to win. I mean, I guess maybe the loss is what's affecting him more than anything else. So there we have it, Midoriya and company triumphed, but now they sort of have to deal with the fallout. Like, Uraraka on one hand is sick, and that seems to be sort of the result of using her quirk. Midoriya, like, he shattered his one arm, the other one's definitely super burned. Like, he's not in good shape for what is ostensibly, like, a classroom exercise. I mean, like, they have to, like, wheel him out on a stretcher. I feel like, you know, this doesn't reflect very well on All Might's tenure as a teacher. Now, what is notable here is that Bakugo isn't upset about injuring somebody. He's more upset about having lost and having essentially been predicted. So it is interesting that he's sort of really upset here that, you know, had Midoriya not held back and fought him head on, he would have lost. And, All Might's trying to sort of put him on the right path here, but now, it is interesting that All Might is sort of saying that Iida here is the MVP. And I guess thinking about it, it kind of makes sense. Like Momo is saying here, Iida was actually playing to the objective here. He was guarding the weapon and acting as a villain, but not sort of going off the rails or going out of his way to injure himself. I mean, I don't know how you can really fault Uraraka other than, Iida was doing a better job. Oh, I take that back. I forgot about that. Momo makes a good point in that she sort of got a little distracted by Iida's method acting. I mean, that doesn't make her a bad hero, but yeah, good on Iida. He needed a W, I think. The poor guy. Now that is actually an interesting idea, that the heroes didn't really respect the spirit of the game, knowing that the prop was not an actual weapon. I mean, that is true, and that is a fair point, but on the other hand, baby steps. This is their second day at the school, you have to walk before you can run, maybe don't assume that you're trying to stop, a big ICBM from going off, baby steps. So, what I like about this episode is that we're starting to see some of the other classmates do their thing. We don't really know too much about their names or abilities or anything. Some people you can sort of figure it out, that girl who's invisible. But yeah, that is a good point, actually. Her quirk sort of relies on her not wearing any clothes. I don't know, I feel like having a race rat around, that's sort of, not good, especially if she's trying to use her powers. There's a lot of ways this could go really bad, and there isn't much of an upside, really. But that all aside, you have an interesting character here who, I guess, to put it lightly, has very divergent physiology. Now, I guess this is rather unfortunate for the invisible girl, seeing as how Todoroki here is able to basically flash freeze the entire building. She's walking around barefoot. It's a good way to get some frostbite on your feet. So this is something that I don't think really comes up too much later, but Todoroki's costume at this stage in the game, I think, is very interesting and almost quasi-villainous in that it appears rather intimidating. I mean, it is notable that he seemingly has fewer villainous tendencies than Bakugo, but that doesn't stop him from being rather ruthless in how he deals with his opponents. And I guess it's nice that he can sort of melt everything again at will. Otherwise, what are you gonna do if your feet are frozen to the ground? So, I guess Todoroki's abilities make a lot of sense here, given that he was one of only a few students who got in based on recommendation. The idea being that you get a recommendation from a pro hero or somebody, sort of giving you a tacit stamp saying, this guy's good, let him in. You know, they don't need to bother with the whole admissions process otherwise. So we've got a nice variety of heroes here. You know, some of them shoot tape, some of them harden their bodies, some of them produce a shadow-like construct, some of them are, I guess, similar in physicality to a frog. Momo's also an interesting character in that she's sort of like Midoriya in that intelligence is one of her big assets. I really do like this montage. You know, it shows off a lot of character pretty quickly. You know, it sort of gives a little bit of an insight into what each of these characters' powers are and what their personality is like, too. You know, it also sort of swiftly divides the class into sort of who the serious contenders are and who's just sort of like, I guess, there but more relaxed. I mean, maybe that's not a fair assessment to make considering they all made it into the school, which is a feat in and of itself. I do think Midoriya has sort of, really sort of handicapped himself by having to miss the rest of the class, you know. I feel like he could have learned a lot and sort of indulged in his hobby if he had been there to witness everything. Now, All Might's making a big show of checking on Midoriya, and I guess part of it is he needs to keep up appearances. You know, he's probably approaching the time limit and he needs to display concern for his students. But beyond that, you know, he has a vested interest in making sure Midoriya is not destroying himself. It is also nice that All Might is aware that Bakugo's not in a good way, and that something needs to happen to straighten him out, or things are gonna get bad. Yeah, now it is interesting that All Might can really only maintain his form for about the length of a class. You know, that's really not good. So I feel like this is only going to be the first time of many where Recovery Girl sort of chastises Midoriya and or All Might. I mean, at this point, Recovery Girl's quirk can't heal Midoriya right away, you know. She's already healed him a couple times in the recent past, so I guess, you know, his body just isn't up to it. It's rather unfortunate considering that he seems to have no choice but to cripple himself repeatedly. So, it's interesting that Recovery Girl actually does know about All Might's secret, and she's one of very few people who does. I mean, I guess good on her for being seemingly trustworthy enough, but I mean, I guess she'd have to be brought into something like this. Yeah, you know, with Recovery Girl sort of chastising All Might about not being a particularly good guide, I feel like this is a little bit of foreshadowing, you know. And I guess, can you really blame All Might too much? If he was essentially a natural-born hero in temperament and in physicality, how can he teach somebody who's starting at a much lower level than he did. I mean, the only thing he can really do is his best, and that might not be very good, but I don't know, when you get down to it, I guess it's just more stuff to go into the legend, as it were, you know. Midoriya as a hero had to overcome all these trials. It'll only, I guess, look better in retrospect. Yeah, so this is rather unfortunate that Midoriya was not only forced to recover, but he was just sort of forced to basically just nap the whole day. Like, I mean, in my academic career, I was always very hesitant to miss class, and I always ended up missing very few, if any. This is a position I would really dread to be in, but you know, I guess there is a bit of an upside in that he seems to have won the respect of several of his classmates. I mean, it's definitely not something he's familiar with, considering that up until this point he had been basically a pariah. I mean, I guess if he's in a school for people like this, he would sort of fit in anyways. But I guess considering his reserved personality, it's nice that everybody's sort of making up for that deficit. Hey, you know, it's another nice little bit of foreshadowing here that Eden never really relaxes. Not that I don't think anything really comes of it in a super meaningful way, but I think it kind of informs his character. You know, the guy with speed-related powers is tense and can't relax. So this is interesting. Midoriya seems to want to kind of smooth things over with Bakugo. And I guess considering everything that's happened, you know, it's kind of reasonable, at least in his mind, to be upset. But to sort of just leave school like this seems... I don't know. Alright, so this, it seems, is bordering on crossing a line here. You know, Midoriya is considering letting him in on the secret, and I feel like that's breaking a pretty big rule here, you know, sort of violating All Might's trust, because I don't think All Might specifically said, you know, you can't tell anybody about this, but you know, by telling somebody he has inherited it, that sort of points the finger at All Might and starts to fray his mythology that, you know, he was a natural-born hero and all that. So, unfortunately, I feel like this isn't actually helping the situation. Midoriya is saying, you know, I was quirkless, but now I have a superpower and it's better than yours. So, that's almost worse in a way, you know, not only was Bakugo beaten, he was beaten by somebody who doesn't know how to use his powers. I guess fortunately he doesn't really believe it. It's probably for the best, honestly, but I mean, he is being rather hostile about it. So this is interesting. Bakugo's sort of realizing that he's no longer the big fish in the small pond. By moving into this larger pond, he's not on top anymore. And it seems to me there's two paths that he could take. He could choose to improve, and in a sense he is doing that, but not from a good place. He more wants to improve because he feels that's his rightful place, rather than because it's, I guess, the only rational thing to do when faced with competition. Now that seems to me like a really ungrateful thing to say, to just sort of shrug off All Might like that and say, save your speeches for someone else. Yeah, I feel a little bad for All Might. He definitely didn't deserve that, but I don't know. I think this is one of those situations where sometimes a little bit of violence might be the answer here. Like, he's clearly got his nose all bent out of shape about everything, but I don't know, coddling him isn't going to help anything. Oh dear. Yeah, All Might's asking about what their conversation was about. Surely there's not going to be a good outcome about this. So here we go, a little bit of foreshadowing. I mean, Midoriya is just sort of talking about how, hey, real interaction with villains, and they're a lot worse than even All Might made them out to be. And it's interesting here that there seems to be, like, a bit of a villainous speakeasy, as it were. There are a bunch of people here, all of a villainous bent, and they're just sort of hanging out like it's normal. I guess it would make sense that if heroism is an industry, there would be a sort of villainous black market to counteract it. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.